The cake had already started sweating. 30 candles leaned slightly to one side, wax bending under the heat of the dining room lights. My mother insisted on real candles, not the thin decorative kind. Milestones deserve flame, she'd said earlier. Pressing them into the frosting like stakes in soft ground. I stood at the head of the table because that's where they'd guided me. Balloons in muted gold. My aunts arguing gently over whether 30 was young or settling. My coworkers, polite and slightly out of place. My boyfriend Daniel at my right side. Steady, observant, thumb brushing the back of my hand in absent circles. And my father at the far end. Holding a glass he hadn't finished but kept raising anyway. He liked to make speeches. They were never cruel enough to be called cruel. Just sharp enough to sting and pass as humor. I'd learned the pattern early. He would begin warmly, drift into commentary, then land on a flaw disguised as fatherly realism. It was his way of keeping expectations reasonable. His word, when I was 22, was, "Let's hope she finds something stable." At 25, freelancing is cute until rent is due. Tonight, at 30, he smiled broadly at the room. To my daughter, he said. 30 years old, still chasing dreams. There was light laughter. Harmless, he continued. We always told her, be practical. But you know her, big ideas. He lifted his glass again. She'll never afford a house, she can barely afford lunch. The laugh this time was louder, reflexive. People look at the speaker before deciding whether to laugh. My father's confidence gave them permission. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. I felt the old sensation first, the internal folding, a small collapse behind the ribs. Not anger, not yet, just exposure. There is something particular about being publicly diminished by someone who once carried you on his shoulders. My mother shifted uncomfortably. One of my coworkers glanced at me, unsure whether to smile. I could have let it pass. I've let it pass before, but 3 days earlier. I'd signed 30 pages in a quiet office that smelled like paper and toner. I'd held a pen that felt heavier than it should have. I'd listened to a woman in a navy blazer explain escrow and closing costs and property tax adjustments. I hadn't told my parents. I hadn't told anyone except Daniel. Not because I wanted drama, but because I needed to do one thing in my life without commentary attached to it. My father lowered his glass. Anyway, he added, chuckling at his own punchline, we love her. Even if she's financially allergic to adulthood. Another ripple of laughter. I looked at him. He looked pleased with himself. Comfortable in the narrative he'd built over years, that I was capable but scattered. Talented but impractical. Almost there, Daniel's thumb points into my knuckle. A question without words, I smiled. Not wide, not brittle. Just steady, actually, I said. The room quieted only slightly. People expect self-deprecating responses in these moments. I didn't give one. About that. I reached into my bag on the chair beside me. It was heavy because I debated bringing him at all. I took out the keys. They weren't ornate. Just a standard silver ring with 3 keys, and a small rectangular tag from the title company still attached. I set them on the table between the plates and the cake. The metal sound against wood was soft. But it cut through the room more effectively than volume ever could. My father blinked. My father a house on Tuesday. I said. No one laughed this time. Daniel's hand remained in mine, but he didn't squeeze again. He didn't need to. My father leaned forward slightly, as if trying to determine whether this was part of a joke he hadn't anticipated. In Brookside. I added. That was when his face changed. Brookside wasn't just a neighborhood. It was the neighborhood he'd once pointed at while driving, saying, people like us don't buy there without help. He knew the street names. He'd talked about property values like they were locked gates. What address? He asked before he could stop himself. I told him. It was a simple answer. A number. A street he recognized immediately. He sat back, not with a crash. Just a slow, recalibrating movement. My aunt gasped softly. One of my coworkers whispered, wow. My father tried to smile again, but it came out thin. He asked, not accusatory, not even skeptical, just disoriented. I said, for 6 years, I took on extra contracts, I stopped talking about it. The last sentence slipped out before I filtered it. Silence expanded, not uncomfortable exactly, but dense. My mother's eyes filled, though she quickly looked down at the cake as if checking the frosting. My father cleared his throat. "Well," he said, attempting humor again. "I guess you can afford lunch after all." A few polite chuckles surfaced, weaker than before. But the dynamic had shifted. Not because I'd embarrassed him. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't listed sacrifices or corrected his history. I just placed evidence on the table. He reached for the keys. Not to take them. Just to touch them. As if verifying. "Wait, you didn't ask for help," he said quietly. "No," I replied. That was the moment that mattered. Not the address. Not Brookside. Not the laughter dissolving into murmurs. He had always positioned himself as the necessary stabilizer in my life. The one who would eventually have to step in when I miscalculated. And now there was nothing to step into. The cake candles had burned low. Wax pooling around their bases. "Make a wish," my mother said too brightly. I leaned forward and blew them out. Smoke curled upward, thin and temporary. People began talking again. Questions about square footage, mortgage rates, paint color. My coworkers relaxed. My aunt's recalibrator toned to admiration. My father remained quieter than usual. Later, when guests filtered into the living room, he approached me near the hallway. "You could have told me," he said. "I considered that. I wanted to be sure." I answered. He nodded once, not entirely satisfied. Not entirely offended either. There was no apology. I didn't expect one. But there was something else, something less comfortable for him than pride. Uncertainty. He no longer knew where my limits were. Daniel joined me, sliding his arm around my waist. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. I smiled at the word. "Home, yes," I said. As we stepped outside into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt steady. The keys were back in my bag. Heavier now with recognition. Inside, laughter resumed, different this time. Not at me, and that was enough.